Let's look at the printing industry. Now, for anyone who's done printing, they probably have worked with paper. And there was a time where there was the paper mill in Nigeria before it got to the point where almost every paper that is worked with in Nigeria is imported. Can you look at that and tell us what you think happened?
I think in general terms, it's been the general, destruction of infrastructure that's happened in Nigeria. And when people talk about the military era, we only look at it from the prism of politics and democracy. However, that interruption to our democracy caused a lot of things. You know, certain things that were institutional were spoilt over the course of a long time. You know, the last ones lasted about 13 years at one stretch. So over that course of time, so many things have happened that certain infrastructure that we've had have been bastardized, have been ignored and been left to rot. So paper mills used to be a huge cornerstone of our economy. In many parts of the country, you had these huge paper mills, you know, that were churning out things for local use and as well for export. A lot of them were nationalized, a lot of things that were owned, you know, the owners couldn't deal with the pressures of the economy and they just upped and left. So by and large, you know, it was a slow, painful and agonizing death. So much so that right now, most of the paper that we consume in Nigeria are imported. And when people, again, talk about, you know, the stress on the foreign exchange, the demand for dollars, one of these things that causes it. Do you get what I mean?
You know, it's on record that Nigeria loses about 180 billion annually because of the import of this material, because it's very sensitive to production. What would be the impact of this on the cost of printing in Nigeria? Looking at all this factor, what would be the impact of it on the cost of printing? And then do you think over time, printing may be out of vogue?
So there are two ways to look at it. First, if you work with any printer or if you are the end consumer, you might not know some of the things, but if you're a professional in that sector, you know that once you need to carry out a printing job, you need to decide now, because there's no, oh, I'll come back and check in the evening, because the price might have changed. And because it's something that is not determined by the wholesalers, by the retailers themselves, it depends on the whims and caprices of the market. So 1 minute you have inflow of FX, the next minute you don't have it, and that has an effect on the price of paper. Eventually, it definitely goes back to the consumer. So if you have to pay 1,000 naira for 1,000 sheets of paper, and now over the course of a weekend, you've had to pay 2,000 naira, definitely it affects the cost of it. But again, you know, printing, there are some other things that are not our fault, right? Technology has made it so that you don't need paper in so many forms. So where you used to need calendars and greeting cards and posters, you know, the advancement of technology has made it such that you don't need to, you can do everything, you know, soft copy, you send soft copy CVs, emails and all whatnot. So on that count, right, that, you know, there's nothing we can do about it. Do you get what I mean? The world is moving fast and we just have to keep up. On the other hand, then we now need to start looking at what are the other elements of printing that we can invest in, that we can run. So for if you make orders on any online shop whatsoever, it still comes in a package, comes wrapped, you know. All of those things are what's likely going to save the printing industry. But printing in the traditional way, give me 500 jotters, 600 calendars, is being phased out, because if you talk to printers, nobody cares, right? There used to be a time that at this time of the year, there'll be huge distribution of diaries, of calendars from brands. It's no longer so. Do you understand? So printers themselves, the industry themselves have to understand that we live in a new world, right? They will need to collaborate with several agencies, including public offices and all what that still need, you know, packaging of all different types.
All right, so technology and the evolutions that have gone on in the printing and packaging industry has opened up more opportunities for the packaging segment of that industry. So it is projected that by the year 2028, that segment will be worth $1 billion. How do we take advantage of that? For instance, for the packaging, you have some local manufacturers complaining of the quality of packaging produced here. So at what point do we come to the level, because there's high competition in that segment, that what you get here stands at par with the imported works?
Well, personally, I'm a huge fan of trying things until we get it, right? We talk about several industries now. Nigeria's banking industry is one of the best in Africa, one of the best in the world. It wasn't always so, right? Telecoms the same way, but we keep at it till we fix it. So we have a huge population. There's no reason for us to be importing packaging. If it's not good, then we try it again. And a lot of times it's a matter of capacity. I've been in rooms that we were contracted to print about 1 million packets of some product per month. We couldn't keep up with that demand, right? And in the absence of that, these brands, products can't wait for you. They will probably import it. But we need to develop capacity in terms of government policy, in terms of investment. It's tough to get, and we're talking about the banking industry this morning, it's tough to get loans, it's tough to get business, support from banking industries. It almost looks like banks just want to collect your deposits and that's it. Collect your ATM charges, send you nonsense emails. But at the end of the day, if we are going to build a country that works, we are going to need to fix it. There's no saving us. Do you get what I mean? So if the packages are not up to par, yes, then we keep fixing it. So what do we need to get it up to par? We need training, we need investment, we need exposure to global best practices. We have to do it by ourselves. It's not going to change. Otherwise, all of these things that causes a ripple effect will just continue happening that way. Do you get what I mean?
Okay.
Let's talk about some of the incentives that can be put in place to encourage investors, even for those who have even gone out of business, to even have the interest to also invest, or reinvest in that business. What kind of incentives can be put in place to attract more investors and also to help those, paper mills that are moribund? Do you think there's any need for a financial intervention from the government or private sectors?
Most definitely. Again, most of the people that have worked in that sector have been from the private sector. Do you get me? So it's been private investors, people who have sourced their money from all over the place. As a matter of government policy, there has to be intervention. It's almost like when there's a crisis in the US and the government builds out the auto industries because they recognize that this is an integral part of the economy. If we have the same understanding that the publishing, the printing industry is integral to our economy, again, I say we have a population of 200 million people. There are school kids, there are hospitals, there are everybody needs, some form of printing or the other. So once we have that understanding, then from an institutional standpoint, we can put in measures on the government side to say, okay, we are going to put X amount of restriction on importation of paper. We are going to lower the cost of doing business. Banking industries have to come up with, perhaps a single-digit loan facility for people that are investing in it, because it's capital intensive. If you walk on the streets now, a 40-year-old machine will cost you almost 10 million naira. A piece of equipment that is no longer used in the West, we still use it here, will cost you that much. So if you have a business that is that capital intensive, it cannot be left to just flounder and for people to, struggle with it.
Now, what you just said now is very striking, that you have a 40-year-old machine that perhaps is out of use in other climes being brought down here. So it means that those who were here, who were doing printing and packaging already, so to speak, stand as a disadvantage in terms of technology. So for a very capital-intensive industry and with the troubles getting loans, is there a way to work around this? Are there other innovations that may not demand so much of technology that can help?
I mean, if you are working in the manufacturing or infrastructure, you have to keep up with technology. There's no sidelining it. If in 1975 you could do 1,000 sheets per hour, and then there's a technology that gives you 100,000 sheets, and that's just an example, but the difference is that striking. There's no way you can compete if you are still leaning on those old technologies. So you are condemned. It's almost like saying you want to use a Nokia 3310 in these days of iPhone 15 and all whatnot. There's nothing you can do to that. However, there are people that have put their money where their mouth is. As far back as 2015, an organization that I worked with invested €1 million in buying one piece of equipment. €1 million. Do you get what I mean? And it's so fascinating that it was hard to convince bankers that it was a worthwhile investment, right? You have people in schools. There's no way you can do it. You still need paper and all of that. So we have to just keep up with what's going on globally and find ways locally that we can keep up. I mean, this is Nigeria. We keep up with the times really fast. So it's not a matter of us not wanting to do. It's more like we can't afford it, so what do we do?
Let's look at the issue of production of magazines. You know, you gave us an example, you know, that you used to work with an outfit. Now, the evolution that happened made that not to be, you know, not to be in high demand as it used to be. Now, for people who are into that niche of production, what should be the narrative for them? You know, now that the world has gone digital, how do you think they can cope in business? And what are the factors over the years that has led to these magazines growing out of instinct?
Again, it's technology. There's nothing you can do with it. When I was younger and you were leaving secondary school, you used to have this thing called slum books that you write your name and you pass it around to all your friends and you do that. Nobody does that anymore. We're all connected on Facebook or Twitter or whatever. So it's an effort in futility trying to lean on old technology when it doesn't apply. So the media industry, which is a subset, you know, has intersections with the publishing industry, has changed rapidly over the last, I mean, each time you blink, something remarkable is happening. So for the publishing industry, if you're looking at magazines, newspapers, periodicals of that nature, there's really nothing that you can do. What you need to do is to find a way to evolve with the times. So now you have to go online, right? You have to go AI. You have to do all of these things. You can still make, and a really good example that I like is the New York Times, right? The New York Times was struggling for a long time as people moved from paper to online. But they found ways to reinvent their business. As of 2018, the New York Times was making $1 billion from subscriptions, right? So if you read the New York Times today, they'll probably ask you, they'll give you maybe 1 or 2 articles for free and ask you to pay $12 for the rest of the year. So they have to invest in the quality journalism that people used to trust in the newspaper and just move it. People are reading. It's the platform and mediums that they are reading on that are different. So people in the publishing sector, magazines, newspapers, they just have to move whatever skill, whatever unique content they were producing, they just have to move it to how people, you know, consume it these days.
So that means that other sectors or other industries are connected to what happens to the printing and packaging industry.
For sure.
All right. So paper is not so much in use anymore, but we have polymer being used so much. We have the big flexes that a lot of companies use for adverts and all that. How much of development do you think is going on in that sector, and how much of local materials do we get from our own polymer industries?
That's a question that is not difficult to answer, but I'm not sure we like the answer, right? As with many things that are Nigerian, again, we've had the misfortune of watching things go down the drain, right? So we've not had a lot of development in that regard. But it points us to the fact that we don't need to import these things because they can be done locally. So if we are going to use rubber or polymer or whatnot, how do we ensure that we resuscitate the agricultural sector, which in turn can support this printing and publishing sector? You see how everything is interconnected. And those are ways that I feel like if we start to think about critically, we are going to see results that we want. Until we start to look at those things and try to decide, do we want to keep looking for cheap dollars, or do we want to produce locally so that there's less pressure on everybody? Unfortunately, the price of the dollar determines everything, right? If you go to the market, people can't do anything because dollar has gone up. So until we start to replace, you know, the demand for foreign exchange by way of importation of goods and services and transferring that energy, attention, and investment into local manufacturing and production, we are going to struggle quite a bit.
Now, given this reality, what do you think should be the priority of anyone who is into printing business? How can they stay competitive, still stay relevant in business, given the realities that have played out with the evolution and then the issue that arises with production?
I mean, we have to evolve fast and very rapidly because the world is not waiting for you. Like I said, there used to be a time that people would get orders for printing 10,000 diaries to distribute to their friends and family and clients. It's no longer so. So what is it that you can do? Can you create keepsakes? Can you do us mugs? Can you do packaging? Can you do all of these things? Given that how we used to be is no longer so. So it's going to take a lot of thinking, a lot of innovative solutions, you know, if you are still relying on printing invitation cards and political campaign posters. It's not as far as recently as 2015, politicians were commissioning 1 million posters, you know, a week to paste all over the place. It's not as so. Yes, they are still going to print a handful, but there are ways to campaign that you don't need to print paper. So for a printer or a print company or a publishing company, that used to be the core of their business, they might need to look into other things. Can we provide books for students? We have 20 million kids out of school, right? As a printer, what are the things that you can contribute to the reduction of out of kids schools? Do you get? So it's not just me thinking about, oh, my business is struggling. How can I look at the other problems that need solution in Nigeria, and how can I deploy my business to fix it? I think that's the only way out.
So if we have it as capital intensive as you've painted a picture for the commercial printing, I imagine what it would be printing security documents such as international passports and maybe even for banks and all. How do we come to the point where we can have our own? We just have like for passport booklet printing, one major contractor doing that. But we need more because we understand the issues with people having international passport, the backlog and all of that. What would be your recommendation?
I mean, for security publishing, it's a whole different sector that needs, you know, critical examination and solutions, right? So we need passports, we need stamps, we need, you know, currency notes, we need, you know, those stickers that you put on your car and all whatnot. And for government, and I hate to harp on government, but there are certain things that if you are going to, you know, have a great nation, it has to come from really dedicated leadership, right? So there are certain things that have to be a must. It is unforgivable that we have a national security and means company, you know, that cannot absorb, you know, what we need to deliver as Nigerians. You know, every 4 years we import our ballot papers, right? That's unforgivable. Again, because I was around that industry a lot in the 2015 elections, there was a contractor that was given the job in the UK. I'm sure if you Google it, you'll still find some. And you know, the elections were shifted by you know, maybe a week or so. So they had to condemn those ballot paper. The guy that was the contractor in the UK just dumped it in the dump site, and people took pictures of it. Right? Those are things that the government has to put its feet down. Again, it's going to be, you know, painful growth, but we have to grow nonetheless. We simply cannot support importation of print materials, sensitive materials that we as Nigerians need. Forget the fact that you want to buy a poster or you want to make a magazine or what. Things that we as Nigerians ourselves need, our currency notes, our passport booklets, is impossible, it's unforgivable that we have to take it someplace for people who don't generally care about us because they are just in there for the money. For us as Nigerians, for national pride, we should be able to say, oh yeah, we are doing this. And I feel like in the last 1 year or so, I think we have small success in that regard, but the effort has to be intensified. There are print companies that have the right equipment that can do these things. If you are buying a $2-3 million machine, and we have them in Nigeria, there are a handful of them, that means they can do all of these things. But if they are not getting the jobs from government, you know, how they'll just print IV and magazine and all whatnot.
I would still like you to dwell on this. What do you think is largely responsible? Is it the issue of trust or lack of capacity or a preference for foreign-made products, or is just our way of life here?
So I think it's a catch-22 situation, right? There was a time that we used to be able to, we had the capacity. Now the capacity dwindled. We don't have the capacity anymore. Now we have a preference for international goods, and then there's that lack of investment. So it now becomes the case of the egg and the chicken, you know. So which one do we solve first, right? So yes, it's all of these things. They are all intertwined, but solving one will lead to fixing the other. If we reduce our dependence on foreign products, perhaps we'll grow to trust ours a bit more. And then when we see that we have that trust, we now have to see that, oh, okay, let's expand the capacity, because there are, there are people who can do it. There are corporations and organizations that can't do it now, but because there's no trust in the so-called Nigerian factor, people trust outside sources. But if we establish that trust, yes, let's not print all of our passport booklets locally, but let's start with 20%, let's start with 30%, and then you see that, yes, we can do it, and then you can now invest in the capacity that will enable you to do a lot more.
All right, still talking about capacity, because you've mentioned that severally. Would it also mean that it's not just about the equipment, and because we don't have some of the technologies due to the capital demanded for it, there's a problem of skills gap too?
Oh, definitely. Oh, definitely. I mean, if you go to any college of technology or any place, they have courses offered in printing technology. But those syllabuses, those curriculums are already themselves outdated. And if I'm a young 19, 20-year-old guy that I'm graduating, I just want to have a piece of paper that I can say I went to school, not because I care about the print technology or the print business. So to fix that, we need to, and I hate to use the word capacity again because we've done it, right? But there's a skills gap for sure. But that's not the only capacity that is lacking. There's a capacity in terms of manpower. When I was a magazine editor, the guy that was the production manager was earning thrice my salary, right? Because of the nature of his job. Do you get what I mean? So the skills gap is there, but the market is even bigger, right? So if we fix the skills gap, we'll be able to, exploit the markets and do a lot better.
Now, the argument some people, put on the table in support for the import of this product is the fact that, hey, here in Nigeria, anything can be abused. You can have the political interference, and the fear is that okay, that could give room to unjust duplication or piracy and all that. Now, you are driving the narrative that these things should be done locally, even if it's going to be some percentage. So how do you avoid all these pitfalls or all these setbacks so that you can have proper production in Nigeria?
We are not reinventing the wheel. There are security measures, there are monograms, there are things that you can input in printed material that will fight piracy. But it cannot be done in isolation. If we want to fight piracy or mass duplication, there are ways to address it, right? There used to be a huge problem of music piracy, for instance, right? We couldn't fight it. But at one point, the music industry decided to partner with these pirates to do legitimate business. So instead of you stealing my work, how about you sell it for me and get 20-30% of it, right? And they found that's pretty much how it was resolved. So for the print industry, it's not enough to say, yeah, we are not safe. Nowhere is safe. Abuse is not a Nigerian word. It occurs everywhere in the world, right? Corruption is not a Nigerian word. These things happen elsewhere. But those countries have been able to build their institutions in a way that is stronger than any one individual or any group of individuals. So that's where we need to get to as a people, that we build these institutions that can fight these things. Do you get what I mean?
Okay, let's look at the customer side now. For almost every product, you have the Standard Organization of Nigeria ensuring that it is up to standard. Should we not also have that for printing? You find some printing jobs, even packaging jobs done, but the quality is so poor. Even before you take it out of the place, some are already fading out. The ink is spilling over and it's just looking very, very poorly done. How do we ensure standards?
So we have standard organizations, even within the industry. There's an institute, there's a body, there's an association. We have all of these things. But as with many things in Nigeria, it's not the legislation that is the problem, it's the execution of it. Do you understand? So we now have to think for ourselves as a people that how do we ensure that the Nigerian factor we always talk about is not synonymous with shoddy jobs? Because that's what it is. And it cuts across industries. If you want to tile your house, you are probably better off bringing some guy from Togo or from Benin Republic because you know that the Nigerian guy don't care enough, to get it done. So the organization, the standards organization is not really the problem. It's the execution of those things. So if you have a bad job, you yourself, But you now tell them, no, just manage, just take it like that now. I think that's what we need to kill, that mentality of take it like that, just manage it. That's what we need to kill. So for printers as a consumer, it is your right to say, I don't want this thing. Where's your quality control manager? I don't want it. Until we start to make those demands, we'll probably, still have to manage. We don't have to manage.
Now, let's look at the issue of training. The format here, maybe in this climate, is the issue of apprenticeship. That's the way the format being used to pass on hands-on experience to maybe to another generation. But you discover likely that is, there's generally apathy when it comes to apprenticeship. What would be the impact of that? And then what should be done to correct this? Because what's in vogue now, there's high demand on this product. Do you think with this format, it is sustainable in Nigeria? What should be done to improve the skills level and skills development in Nigeria?
So as Nigerians, we have to prioritize vocation. Not everybody is going to have theoretical jobs, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? There are still jobs that need actual vocational training. That, I think, is what the College of Technology, polytechnics were established to do anyway. So if you are going to a polytechnic or a college of technology, you are not studying to sit behind a desk and push paper. You are studying to become, a master at something. But over the years, we've seen that kind of like, being deprioritized because everybody just wants to wear a suit and tie. Just wants to wear a suit and tie and sit behind the desk. But there's room, there's space, there's need for people that have technical skills, right? When the Lagos State government, for instance, was designing, the rail system, you found that a lot of people that applied to work there were not necessarily university graduates. Not to say that they are uneducated, but we have to now prioritize vocational training. It's almost like we leave anybody who has failed at passing WAEC, come and go and learn work. Yes, that's a nice, gesture, to say, okay, if you can't score 3 A's, you probably can learn tailoring or printing or whatever over the course of 3 years. It shouldn't be so. It should be as serious as going to school to study medicine. You are not going to be a doctor because you failed at pharmacy, come and read medicine. It doesn't happen that way. So that's the kind of intensity that we need to give to vocational training within the print and publishing sector and elsewhere.
All right, wrapping up. What's the future looking like for the printing and packaging industry? Now, for some who are already in the business and maybe thinking of where to put their money as some investment, now the truth about it is that after some years, some of these machines will be obsolete. What would be the wise thing to do, looking at the trends, and what exactly, where is the compass facing as far as the trend is concerned?
So it depends on where you're looking. It depends on how you're looking at the cup. If you're looking at it as half empty, it's dire. If you're looking at it from the lens of things are bad, you're not going to see anything good in it. But if you look at it from the perspective of the glass being half full, then you see the potential. Like we've mentioned, our huge population itself is a boon, right? There's so many people that have demand for these things. So despite the fact that the technology changes rapidly, there are still ways that you can still deliver. You probably won't need to have a $1 million machine if you are not doing large volume. Perhaps you need a $10,000, right? Perhaps you need a $5,000, right? So these are ways to look at it. So if you're in that industry already, you know the pain points, you know the things that you're facing, but you also need to be very smart with designing solutions for the entire, economy of Nigeria as well. We also have to understand that print and publishing is extremely important. It's extremely important. So we have to design. I expect that there will be lawmakers that will face lobbying from the print professionals to say, these are the things that we want. And this can only be done by way of legislation. How much duty do you need to charge me if I'm bringing paper in? If I had my way, I wouldn't bring paper in anyway. But in the case that I have to bring paper in and import them, how can you reduce custom duty? How can you lean on the banking industry to give us single-digit loans? In that way, we can start to see, the changes that can ensure that the industry continues to thrive.